Today, we're diving into a condition that affects millions of people, but is so often misunderstood: bipolar disorder. We're going to break down what it really means to live with those intense highs and deep lows, and why getting the diagnosis right is just so incredibly important. You know, we all have good days and bad days. We've all felt on top of the world one moment and kind of down the next. But have you ever stopped to wonder, where's the actual line between a normal, everyday mood swing and a mood disorder? That question? It gets right to the very heart of what we're talking about today. Okay, let's start with a number that might surprise you: 4.4%. According to the National Institute of Mental Health, that's how many adults in the US will experience bipolar disorder at some point in their lives. So this isn't some rare, far-off condition. It's a reality for millions of people. At its core, trying to understand bipolar disorder is kind of like understanding a story of two completely different worlds. We're not just talking about feeling happy or sad. No, this is about navigating these profound, extreme highs and lows that can literally shape a person's entire reality. So what does that actually mean, clinically? Well, bipolar disorder is defined by these major shifts between two opposite poles. You've got the highs, which are periods of what's called mania, or a slightly less severe version called hypomania, and then you have the lows, which are periods of depression. And look, these are not just small mood shifts. They are distinct episodes that deeply affect a person's energy, their behavior, and just their ability to function day to day. But you know, a definition can only take you so far. To really get what that feels like, listen to this quote from a person named Sue. I mean, it just perfectly captures that jarring contrast: feeling absolutely invincible one minute and then completely crushingly hopeless the next. That right there is the human experience behind the clinical terms. Now, here's something that's really crucial to understand. Bipolar disorder isn't just one single thing. It actually exists on a spectrum, with different types or classifications that really depend on the severity and the nature of those mood episodes. So on this spectrum, there are four main diagnoses to be aware of. Bipolar 1 and bipolar 2 are definitely the most well-known. Then you have cyclothymic disorder, which involves lots of periods of hypomanic and depressive symptoms, but they're less severe than in bipolar 1 or 2. And finally, there's a kind of catch-all category for when symptoms don't quite fit the other types, but are still causing real problems. The key difference between all of them really just comes down to how severe and how long the symptoms last. All right, let's zoom in on the two most common types: bipolar 1 and bipolar 2. The real defining difference? It's the highs. For a bipolar 1 diagnosis, a person has to have at least one full-blown manic episode. We're talking an intense high that can last for a week or even lead to hospitalization. For bipolar 2, the high is less severe. That's the hypomania we mentioned, but the diagnosis requires at least one major depressive episode. So it really hinges on the intensity of those highs and the presence of those major lows. Okay, so we've been throwing these words around: mania, hypomania, depression, but what do these moods actually look and feel like in real life? Let's break down what the symptoms are. I want you to think about it like a seesaw. It's the perfect visual. On one side, way up in the air, you've got mania. This can look like feeling incredibly high or wired, needing way less sleep, having thoughts that just race through your head, and maybe acting really impulsively. Then on the other side, down on the ground, you have depression. That can feel like a deep sadness or hopelessness, crushing fatigue, pulling away from everyone you love, and having trouble just thinking straight. They are quite literally polar opposites. And this quote from Melissa, wow, it offers such a fascinating and frankly complicated look at that manic side of the seesaw. For some people, it can actually feel incredible, like this rush of creativity and energy. And this highlights a huge challenge, right? A manic state might not feel like a problem at all while it's happening. And then, boom, you have the total opposite end of that seesaw. This quote from Erin just shows how stark that contrast is. The depressive episodes can be so debilitating, with the physical exhaustion so heavy that even moving is a struggle, and the need for sleep can be completely overwhelming. All of this whole wild ride of experiences, it brings us to our final and maybe most important point: the massive challenge of diagnosis. Because figuring out if someone has bipolar disorder isn't always simple, but getting it right is absolutely essential for getting the right help. So why is it so incredibly important to get that diagnosis right? I mean, what's the big deal? Well, the answer is all about the serious risks that come with getting it wrong. Here's the danger. Bipolar disorder gets misdiagnosed as depression all the time. And it makes sense, right? People usually go ask for help when they're in that depressive low, not when they're feeling euphoric during a manic high. But that mistake is critical because the standard antidepressants used for depression can be totally ineffective for bipolar depression. And even worse, they can sometimes trigger a full-blown manic episode, which just makes everything way more complicated and harder to treat. And this is why an accurate diagnosis is so much more than just a label. It is, without a doubt, the first and most critical step toward finding a treatment plan that actually works. One that helps manage the symptoms and allows a person to build a stable, fulfilling life. It's the whole foundation.
And that leaves us with one last thing to think about. If our moods really do tell a story about our well-being, the real question is, are we listening closely enough? Thanks for joining me for this one.